This is Don Cusic with the Music Biz, and my guest is Del Bryant, who is Director of Performing Rights Relations, BMI, in the Nashville office for the South.
Correct.
First question, how did you get involved in the music industry?
Well, I, like many of the people in the BMI office in Nashville, are second-generation people. And there's a good reason for that. I think people that were raised in the industry can best work and function in the industry. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge that you've grown up with, not especially innate, but innate in your growth. My parents are Boudleaux and Felice Bryant, songwriters. Wrote such songs as Bye Bye Love, Wake Up Little Susie, Rocky Top, and a host of other songs. And I was raised in a very creative atmosphere, living with writers. And Frances suspected that I might be able to work with them, and I was very lucky to have the opportunity to come to BMI based on my background.
Okay, what is a performance rights organization?
A performing rights organization is an organization which pays writers and publishers for their works when they're performed on radio and TV, basically. Cable, obviously, many forms of the use, so to speak. The copyright law of 1909 specifically stated that the writer, the creator, and his agent, the publisher, was entitled to compensation when his works were performed publicly for profit. As I'm sure you know, in 1976, the revision bill, which took place, but went into effect in 1978, struck out the profit motive. So now, a writer's entitled to be compensated when his works are publicly performed. Well, I think it was 1914 ASCAP went into existence in order to see that the intent of the copyright law was fulfilled, that indeed writers and publishers were compensated. They basically fashioned themselves after SACEM, which is the French performing rights organization, which I believe started in 1889, I believe, sometime around the same time the Eiffel Tower was built. That's the way I remember it. And ASCAP went into business in 1914, and they were the first performing rights organization in this country. BMI came into existence in the early 40s as an alternative to ASCAP. And we and ASCAP, along with CSAC, the third performing rights organization in this country, exist to see that the copyright law is carried out, so to speak. The copyright law outlined mechanical income, synchronization, sheet music, print, performing rights, grand rights, and those rights which the writers and their agents were entitled to. We exist specifically to address performing rights.
Okay. There are three performing rights organizations. Why are there three, and what are the differences?
Well, I think in any situation where there's competition, there obviously has to be a first one. ASCAP was the first in this country. They saw the need. The copyright law at that time in 1909 was basically new, and in 1914 it was still basically new, and it was obvious that someone had to stand up for the writers. It was impossible at that time, as it is today, even more so, for a writer to go out and physically find all of the people that wish to use his music and license it. Consequently, or conversely, it would be impossible for the users who have music to go out and find the creators in order to license it. So ASCAP, as BMI, as CSAC, exists to be the middleman, the go-between. What was your specific question?
What's the differences between ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC?
Well, ASCAP was first. They, to a certain extent, became monopolistic. Am I saying that word right? I have a hard time with that.
Close enough, monopolistic.
Do you understand it out there in TV land? So
they're asleep.
Right. In 1940, basically late 39, 40, the users of music were dealing with ASCAP on a rate increase. ASCAP charges a specific rate. It was a percentage of income from the user of music for the license of using the music they represented, the writers and publishers. The broadcasters, who were ready for a slight increase, were somewhat surprised when ASCAP asked for many times more the rate than they had suspected that ASCAP would ask for. They refused to pay, and ASCAP said, if you don't pay, you don't play. So in 1940, you had the ASCAP war, and basically the most performed artist or most performed author of that time for several years was Stephen Foster, because that was public domain. You didn't have to have a license to use public domain works. So BMI came into existence at this time. Approximately 600 broadcasters got together to come up with an alternative. They initially hired arrangers to transcribe European music and PD music for live orchestra. Most radio in those days, and there wasn't TV obviously at that time, was live music, live performances, live network performances. And you had bands that performed on stage live. So it was very important to have music for these bands to play, and we spent a lot of our early energies in transcribing PD music and European music to be played. After a short period of time, ASCAP saw that the new organization known as BMI, Broadcast Music Incorporated, was coming up with an alternative to their music. We indeed weren't performing the standard music of the day, the Sinatra, the Bing Crosby, the big bands. We effectively cut that out for a short period. Who knows how long it could have lasted. Nevertheless, it was enough to convince ASCAP that an alternative was in the making and to cause a certain amount of trepidation on their part. And they came to the table and said, well, it's time to settle with you folks, and we'll give you that. We'll only ask for the increase which you expected, and we'll just forget about this new organization which you've started. And the broadcaster said, wonderful, but just to make sure that you never get to the point of strength that you felt you were at, or that you might achieve, whereby you can, so to speak, blackmail us, we will keep this operation in existence. And BMI basically came into existence at that time. In the early days, began much as a publishing company. We divested our publishing rights at that time to another company, specifically got into the performing rights business, and BMI was born. It was started basically by this handful of broadcasters who were looking for an alternative to ASCAP. And as I'm sure you know, there is no advantage to these broadcasters specifically. The stock cannot be bought or sold. It cannot be switched, changed. There's no benefit to the stockholders. No dividends have ever been paid. And in fact, we run into broadcasters many times that have bought stations, bought chains, so to speak, that weren't aware that they were part of the original charterers of BMI.
Okay, a song is released.
Yeah.
What goes into effect to make sure it gets money from BMI or ASCAP?
Okay, and in a minute we need to backtrack and go to CSAC. We didn't speak about CSAC.
Why don't we just do it right now?
Okay. In I believe it was 34, 35, 36, one of those years.
I think it was 32.
33 or 32.
Yes.
In the 30s, I suspect, a gentleman by the name of Heineke, who was very active in the foreign market, came up with the idea of bringing a lot of European music over and representing it in this country. And other than that, I can't really speak with a lot of authority with regard to CSAC. It is the third performing rights organization in this country. Its origins are in the 30s. It is the only performing rights organization in this country that is solely owned by a specific family. It is not a non-profit organization. It is in the business for profit. I think it's safe to say that in its largest share, it's never controlled more than between 2 or 3% of the market. Mm-hmm. Their primary strengths in the past, although this is changing, we're in a changing music community and world. Its primary strengths have been gospel. In the last few years, with gospel becoming very, very, very active, a big business music, BMI and ASCAP have gotten more and more into those fields also, and so CSAC now is reaching out in more contemporary and country music fields. But for a long time, that was their primary strength. And as I said, they are a family-owned operation. The family still owns them, and they operate outside of the jurisdictions that BMI and ASCAP do, as we're a nonprofit and operate under consent decrees.
CSAC takes 2 to 3% at best in music. ASCAP and BMI divide?
I would say that of the music which is performed on radio and TV today, and specifically throughout the clubs, cabarets, amusement parks, so forth, today, I think it's safe to say that BMI probably has between 60 and 70%. At any given week, we're somewhere around 50% of the entire charts. But I think it's safe to say that we're living in a very nostalgic age, as attested to by shows in the past years such as Happy Days and things of this sort. And the music of the 50s now and the 60s, the Beach Boys, this is the music of our youth, much like the music of Sinatra and Bing Crosby was the music of our parents' youth. And when they were our age, a lot of that music was reoccurring. It was the oldies but goodies. The oldies but goodies which we hear so often on radio and TV today, and which quite often are used in themes in movies, so forth, those are BMI songs. So even though our percentage isn't as high in the charts in any given week, I maintain that still between 60 and 70% of the music we hear is most likely BMI.
Okay. I was asking you, when a song is released, record is released, how does it get into the system to start getting money?
Okay. Since 1953, 4, 5, or 2, BMI has been directly affiliating writers. At one time, we affiliated only the publishers, and the publishers handled the writers and distributed that income to them. At this point, since those days, we have been affiliating writers and publishers direct. It is the responsibility of the writer and the publisher to affiliate directly with BMI. Unless they do that, we have no obligation, and indeed are incapable because of the lack of communication, to send them performing rights income. We have not plugged their songs into the computer, so to speak. We are not monitoring those titles which we know nothing about. So first and foremost, it's the obligation of the creator, of the publisher, to be aware enough of the industry that they are trying to operate in to realize that they have to have an affiliation with a performing rights organization. So first of all, it's the writer's responsibility. At the point he realizes that it's important for him to be with one or the other performing rights organization, he attaches himself, so to speak, with one and gives us the titles in which he hopes to have performances, which he has got on record or is being performed live in certain venues or over TV or movies, so forth. He indexes those with our various systems. We and ASCAP and CSAC have various paperwork, so to speak, whereby you index your song, and the song is married to a number, and it is put into our computer, and then in our various logging systems, those songs are identified, stuck back in the computer, and once again married with the number. And we come up with performance figures, and then we assign amounts of money to each performance and generate statements, so to speak, and those go out to the writers with money.
Now, how do you monitor?
I simplified that, didn't I?
Yes, very much so. Now, how do you monitor these?
Okay, we, to begin with, don't have a monitoring system. We have a logging system. This becomes important when you're discussing ASCAP and BMI because our terminology is somewhat different, and although I wouldn't hold anyone to it, from time to time I've heard people become very exacting and very, very critical of the terms, and so for that reason I think we'll keep these more exacting. BMI has a logging system. ASCAP has a monitoring system. Our system was designed in order to take the largest possible sample at the lowest cost, at the same time sacrificing sacrificing
no accuracy?
No. Sacrificing nothing. We send out logs. When I say we have an independent accounting firm which does this. BMI personnel at no time know what stations are being logged, with the exception of network, which is logged on a complete basis, 24 hours a day. Quite often when we speak, we find ourselves falling into talking about radio because that's the glamour of the business, having a song on the radio. We log radio. We send out, as I said, the accounting firm sends out paper logs, sheets that call for titles, writer, artist, various information which is found on records. We send these out to stations throughout the country. Basically, we will log every radio station, 99% of the radio stations in this country, within every year to year and a half, every 12 to 18 months, 16 months. They receive the log, and for a week, 1 week out of their existence in that year to year and a half, they will keep a very detailed log of what they play.
They just write down everything that they
write
play.
down the titles. If the writer information is on the record, they'll put that or the artist name. And then after that week of logging, they will send us back the log. It goes directly back to BMI. It comes from an accounting firm, goes directly back to BMI. We go over these logs to analyze, so to speak, if they're proper, if they've been filled out properly, if indeed they look as though they're correct. And then they go through the various processes which put them in a position where they're fed into a computer and once again married with the song numbers that are assigned on the initial clearance form that the writer sends into BMI. As I said, this system was designed because primarily it enables us to send out more logs to more stations and log more hours of music. We basically log between 4 and 5 times as many hours as our competitor ASCAP. ASCAP has a monitoring system whereby they send out tape teams to the markets whereby they receive most of their income. In other words, the largest stations. They send out taping teams, or they hire various people in specific areas to tape off radio stations. They will tape entire shows, entire segments, entire days of music, and they will send these tapes back to New York. And much as we're sitting in a rather large room today, they'll have many people lined up, as in a secretarial bank, with earphones on, listening to these tapes and annotating the titles down. They maintain that their system is more accurate because they monitor and they have an exact copy of what was performed, and that our system is less accurate because we leave it up to the disc jockey, and we all know how disc jockeys are. Well, I don't feel that this is accurate. Obviously, I'm on the other side of that argument.
But have you met any resistance from disc jockeys or programs?
No. What we tell people when they bring this up, and very few people bring it up voluntarily, they quite often may have spoken to our competition, and they have questions that they'd like addressed, and this is one that's quite often asked. We feel, to begin with, that radio is so much more controlled than it was in the days of Pale, in the days of radio being tampered with. Most disc jockeys today, and haven't you worked in radio before? I know you've worked
a little bit of radio news,
close with people. Most disc jockeys today have to sign affidavits verifying that they have received no income from outside sources that relate to the industry, that there are no conflicts of interest and so forth. It's very closely guarded. There is a tremendous adherence to playlists today, which wasn't the case in years gone by, where you had disc jockeys playing whatever they liked, free-form radio. This, unfortunately, in many ways, is gone by the wayside. There are many controlled playlists today for the most part. A lot of music is automated, and they simply take it off lists of what they're playing that week. There isn't as much room for chicanery, trickery, as there possibly was at one time. We do not feel that this is going on for many, many reasons. An interesting question arose once at a seminar when ASCAP was making their point as opposed to our system. They were touting theirs. I asked the question, I said, how is it possible for someone who works and lives in New York, most likely raised in New York, raised in the North certainly, to listen to music and identify all the titles when quite often the programming of today doesn't give the time space to identify titles and artists. They just play continuous music, sometimes hours at a time with no break. And they said, well, we've got people that are very thorough. And I said, well, in the case of an instrumental song, and indeed if there's an instrumental version of a George Jones tune, or Rocky Top, or any number of what I'll call highly traditional type music, not of the North. Or it could be Latin, it could be anything, certainly instrumental music. How can they identify these? And they said, well, there are many systems. We have a fa-sol-la file where we can go, and by judging by the music, they can, and it's a long entailing situation, which I wasn't totally convinced by. And I said, well, what if they miss it? They said, well, if they miss it, we have on the tape box the address of the station, the air personality who was on the air at that time, and we can go back to the radio station, to the disc jockey, and have them identify the tune. And I said, well, we do that at in the first case. That's what we do initially. It's a lot cheaper. You ought to try it.
And the reaction was?
He went, oh. Basically, I think it's safe to say both systems work. They're both designed to serve writers and publishers. I think that BMI's entrance into performing rights to a certain extent outlines the way that we view our responsibility to the people we serve. We started in the early 40s with that music which had been basically ignored by ASCAP, which was primarily interested in show music, as they call Tin Pan Alley music, and the movie industry which had developed in the West Coast. The people of the South, the traditional music, what later became in the 50s because of Billboard called country and western music. That Billboard gave it that designation, actually. It wasn't, the people didn't rise up and call the music country and western. But BMI initially embraced the country people who had not been able to join ASCAP and embraced what was known as race music, black music, that had been ignored by the big city music society. We embraced those people. We affiliated those people. We worked with those people. We used them as the core of a new beginning. Unbeknownst to the early pioneers of BMI, from that came what is affectionately known as rock and roll. And I think it's safe to say the music that BMI started with was grassroots, was rural, was music not of New York necessarily or the movie industry, music of the people. So consequently, our system is designed to assist these people from the beginning. And by our logging system, we are able, as I stated a few minutes ago, to log between 4 and 5 times as many hours. Now, this doesn't mean that we pay 4 or 5 times as much money to anyone. It simply means that we pick up more titles and are and that enables us to distribute to more people, which is what the copyright law's main intention was. That if you have a performance, you are entitled to be compensated for it. It doesn't cost a lot of money to pay Ida Fields down in Hoboken, Alabama, $2.75 for a song that she wrote and pressed up 50 records and sent them out to the radio stations. Those records are performed. She's entitled to compensation. Our system quite often picks these up better than a monitoring system. It's very expensive to send teams out to monitor. So we pick up these people. We encourage these people quite often to the point where they move into the mainstream. I can't tell you in my tenure with BMI, which has been approximately 14 years, how many people I've met that had early beginnings with those 27-cent checks, those $1.50 checks. And I can't tell you how many I've seen framed, because that represented their entrance into the music industry. All of a sudden, a big operation, a big corporation at the core of the industry said, you exist, and we're glad to represent you.
Okay, now you say you pay writers and publishers. Where does the money come from?
The writers and publishers are paid by the users of music. We are the middleman. In order to use music in this country publicly, not for profit anymore, as that was stricken in the '76 Act, but in order to publicly use music, the copyright law states that you have to compensate the creator. So the money that we distribute comes from the user. The broadcasters, the cabaret owners, the airlines, the hotels that pipe music in for the enjoyment of their guests.
Everybody that plays.
We collect money from the users of music, whomever they may be. Radio and TV, this includes network and local radio and TV. We receive basically a small percentage of their gross income from advertising, less certain deductions. And I maintain that it's the smallest amount they pay for the most important thing which they use, that's the music. This money comes to us regardless of how they buy a blanket license with us or ASCAP basically. And they pay a certain percentage of their gross income from advertising, less certain deductions, for this blanket license.
Blanket license meaning they can play anything that BMI
This blanket
license
is the open door into our catalog. It allows them to play any of the songs in our repertoire, our repertory, if everyone's not French out there. And they can play the song one time or a million times. It doesn't change the amount of their license. The money comes in, and then we allocate a certain amount of money to each play as determined by our logging system.
Now, how much per play is that, or do you break it down like that?
Okay, we have a payment schedule that we're operating under now, which I think is 1984. Yes, 1984 payment schedule. We update it from time to time. This payment schedule calls for the minimum payments that we make on various types of performances. We break radio down into two specific types of performance, Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 stations are those stations which pay us in excess of $4,000 a year. Group 2 stations are those stations which pay us less than $4,000 a year. We have a certain penny amount attached to each type of performance. We also have a bonus system whereby the more successful your song becomes, the more money you make per the same performance. Example, after the first 25,000 performances, well, this really isn't an example, this is the exact breakdown of our bonus system. After the first 25,000 performances, which are all paid at the base rate, from 25,000 to 50, you're paid at 1.5 the base rate. From 50,000 to 300,000 performances, you're paid at 2 the basic rate. From 300,000 to a million performances, you're paid at 2.5 the base rate. From a million and over, 4 times the base rate. This is a system whereby we can reward the creators and the publishers of the songs which are most popular, which indeed enable us to go to radio and license them at all, because we go up and say, we represent these titles. These are the titles which you play, which you need, which you know. And along with these titles, obviously you're getting many more, but you need us because we represent the music that America loves. And we do compensate the writers and publishers of the more popular songs to a certain degree more. I will say that ASCAP, CSAC, every performing arts organization has a way of rewarding those people which enable them to go and carry that heavy stick when negotiating for increased rates.
Okay, how about concerts? When somebody performs songs in concerts, are they paid for those? The writers paid for those?
Well, yes and no. It would be impossible for a performing rights organization, specifically in this country, and I say this country because in other countries sometimes they do pay people for specific performances, live performances. But this country is so vast, it would be impossible for us to put representatives in every beer hall, in every concert hall, in every performing arts center around the country, taking down exactly what was performed. It wouldn't be cost productive. It would cost us more money than we possibly even bring in to put that many people in the field. We do charge a fee when music is performed live, and we do receive a small income from concerts and live performances and cabarets and places of this sort. This money basically goes into the overall fund or pool of income, which is dispersed according to radio and TV performances. We make the basic assumption, and I feel it's a good one, that the music which is performed live is a reflection of what is popular on radio and TV. Billy Joel does a concert. He sings his hits and the songs which are possibly going to be hits from his album, the newer material, and the older material which has been very successful. Indeed, you go to his concert and you hear songs that you hear on the radio. So the fact that the promoter or the venue itself had to pay several $100 BMI and or ASCAP license, it gets back into the system, and Billy Joel's overall income per radio and TV is somewhat bolstered by this excess money, and it does go back to him. So it's a roundabout way. It does get back to the people that are...
But Joe Schmo, who writes a song and goes to a bar and plays it, is not going to get paid by BMI for that.
Not unless Joe Schmo has some works that are being performed on radio and TV that are in some manner bolstered by the general licensing of the club that he played in.
Okay, every year BMI gives awards.
Once again, I would like to stress the point that we are designed for service, and we like to see the people that have works publicly performed compensated. It would be impossible to compensate everybody who stands up in front of people and sings on live venues because we can't identify all those performances. There's no way to keep up with it. And if we ask for people to send us a list of what they performed, there would be too much room for confusion, for trickery, for any number of problems. We once again make the basic assumption that that music which is performed is a reflection of what is popular through radio and TV. I wish there were a way to do it to make sure that everybody was compensated. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Okay, BMI gives awards every year to the most played songs.
Yes.
The charts supposedly reflect the most played songs. Sometimes a record that's been at the top of the charts doesn't get a BMI award. Sometimes a record that didn't do too well on charts gets a BMI award. Why the discrepancy?
Well, I think to really get to the root of that problem, we'd have to talk to somebody at Billboard or Cashbox or R&R. This tells me, and I suspect it tells anybody with a modicum of common sense, that the charts aren't the best reflection of what's being played. Wouldn't you suspect that that's what it means?
Well,
I think it has to mean that, obviously.
Yeah. Could also mean the method of getting your information, too.
Well, I don't suspect that's true, because any #1 song makes various amounts of money, receives various amounts of performances. Just because it's #1 in Billboard, it may have never been played in the Southeast or any number of markets. Billboard, and specifically, does their charts on a limited number of stations, 160 now or something of that sort, the reporting stations. We log 99% of all the stations which exist. The record labels will tell you that they have many #1 songs that don't, or #1 albums which don't sell as well as albums or singles that didn't reach the top 10. I don't think that the charts are a good indication of sales. They're obviously not. We're told daily by the labels. And the performing rights organizations confirm that it's not the most accurate form of determining performances. CSAC, interestingly enough, makes their payments based on chart activity primarily. This is not because they feel it is most accurate. It's simply that they're not a large enough operation to go into the expense of a monitoring or logging system, which without a doubt is more accurate. It's much like a polling system whereby NBC or Gallup or Harris tells you within 2 or 3 percentage points who will be the next senator of a given state by monitoring 1,000 people in various cells: black, white, ethnic, Chinese, Oriental, high income, low income. The monitoring logging system is a rather accurate system. The charts serve their purpose, but they don't serve ours specifically. We find that there are many songs, what we call standards, that receive 100,000 performances a year and never show up in a chart because they haven't had a new record on them in years. But nevertheless, they are getting the performances, and many of these songs get more performances than songs that show up in the charts simply because there is a hype on them. There's a new record on them. There's a momentum behind them from the label, from their manager, from live performances that the acts are doing, from any number of variables. But this does not translate always into performances.
Okay. How does a person obtain a job with the performing rights organization? How do you become an executive?
Well, I think you go to work for a performing rights organization much in the way you go to work for any operation. You hang around the people that are involved. You try to prepare yourself with the background of information that pertains to whatever field you wish to get into, and more specifically the type operation you wish to get into. You hang around the people that are doing it. You befriend them. You quite often offer to work for less than you feel you should simply to get in the door. It's the same as working for a publishing company or any other company, really. You identify what you want to do and you go after it. And much like any other company, past experience is very important. I think on-the-job training is the most important aspect of the music business, because this is truly a business of contact and the people you know and things of that sort. So you need to be around it. You need to make yourself available to it. I don't think that they've designed a course yet which relates to the music industry that is more valuable than on-the-job training or hanging out in the proper way, in the proper places, with the proper people at the proper times.
Okay, and what's the salary range for performing rights executives?
Since I'm not on the top, and since it's been a long time since I started, I don't think I'm really qualified to answer that.
In ballpark figure?
No, I wouldn't.
$3,000 a year?
$3,000 a year, probably. No. I think that it's comparable to top positions in the music industry, whether it be label, publishing companies, anything other than something which is specifically tied to strong success. In other words, if you're an agent and all of a sudden you're representing Alabama, you're obviously going to skyrocket in income.
So you're saying entry level would be 15 to 20?
I'm not saying anything about a specific figure. I'm not the person. To ask that, I've always felt that I was fairly compensated for what I do. I will say that BMI specifically, unlike our competition, and quite a bit unlike a lot of the organizations in the music industry that I've been around, and I've been around most of them all my life, specifically takes care of their people because they realize the value of longevity. We offer a service to people. You offer the service best when there's continuity to the people involved in the organization which is offering that service. Continuity, to a great extent, comes from longevity in positions. You simply soak up more information. You can remember what happened 5 years ago with someone's account, and you can circumvent a lot of search by simply having people that have always been with you. BMI recognizes this and has made it very attractive to its employees to remain. We have an office of approximately 27, 28 employees. When I came to work at BMI, there were 11 employees. So obviously we're growing. But in this operation, we have almost half the people are over 10 years with BMI. I don't think that that can be matched by any operation in Nashville. Certainly not our competition, and certainly no major record company in town. So without getting into specifics, it's safe to say that certainly BMI compensates their people to the point where they keep their people, and that is a tremendous vote of confidence for BMI, and a tremendous reason to be involved with BMI if you're an affiliate. There is continuity of service, and that's the most important thing we're giving our people, is service.
And thank you for providing your service today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
And sharing your immense knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you.
It's Don Cusic with The Music Biz.